So, according to my godmother, my Aunt Annie, she would put me into warm water and cold water, try to revive me. Meanwhile, in my mind, my spirit was traveling through a atmosphere at a rapid pace. Now, I know this sounds very unusual, but this is what I feel happened. So, as I was traveling at this horrendous speed, there was a voice, and the voice said, "You have to go back. We are not ready for you yet." And so, consequently, I guess what my aunt was doing revived me, and so I started a human life on this earth. And from that point on, my life has been very interesting. So we'll say that my grandfather, who built this beautiful large brick home, was two-story with a full basement, and he had managed a cement company, so I'm sure this is how that got built. Now, this was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1923, 1523, and it was during the winter, naturally, and their type of heat was wood stoves and coal, and the form of mobility was a Model T or a horse team. That's how modern they were. There was no radio. There was a telephone, but it was mounted on the wall, and you had 10 rings because that was your call. And then when you rang the 10 rings, you'd lift up the receiver and say, "Is anyone on the line?" And so that's how they communicated. Naturally, when the rings came, everybody in the country was listening, and that's called gossip. But that's what happens in small communities, and this was a farm community. And so as I continued to grow up, I remember visiting my grandfather's house there many times, and he had a large round table and wooden chairs, and I could stand under that, and I would pick up with my fingernails. I'd pick the gum that was stuck underneath this table, and I can remember that as if it was yesterday. And I could hear them talk, but I didn't understand them, and they spoke Czech, and they were second generation in this country, and they loved America. Cedar Rapids was the distribution point for all mid-European people coming into the United States, and they would then disperse them because they were farmers to different counties, Johnson County, Lynn County. My great-grandfather was sent way up into the northeast corner of Iowa to Spillville, Iowa. His name was Joseph Vitt Payer. And so that is another story, but we will continue on this little avenue that we're discussing today. So as I grew up there, I remember playing in the yard, and Grandpa's yard had a big sort of a sloping hill, and I used to love to slide down there in a cardboard box. And I could remember my mother and someone else in the family talking about Uncle John coming home from the Army from World War I, which was ended in 1918. So I was playing soldier at that time. And so I had a little red wheelbarrow, and the road naturally was all dirt. And then when it would rain and the Model Ts would go up and down, they would cause ruts. So I would go down on the road with my little wheelbarrow, and then I'd get stuck and couldn't get out of the rut. So I'd say, damn, ooh, I gotta go, because how did I learn how to cuss so early? On the farm. My dad had a hired man, and he'd set me on the Dutch window in the barn and teach me how to cuss. And I guess that's where I continue to cuss once in a while. But that's life. And so then eventually my folks moved from the farm to the city. They moved on J Street called Schaefer Heights. They had a little house, had a basement. We had about, I imagine, 5 acres because my dad had horses and teams, and he would plow this property, and they would plant corn and all the vegetables that we needed. And we were out on top of a hill. So as I grew up, I became a person that needed to go to school. Well, down this hill, down to the bottom, was a little farm schoolhouse. It had 1 room, and it had the 1st grade to the 12th grade. Uncle John and Grandpa Pear helped build this school. And so consequently, I went to school there as a little tyke. And then it had an outside privy, and if you had to go, you had to lift up your hand, number 1 or number 2, and the teacher says you could go to the bathroom. Well, I remember one day that I was really hungry, so I put my hand up so I could go, and I didn't come back. I went up the hill and went home to get something to eat. And during the winter, I would use my sled and slide down this hill and cross the road and under the barbed wire fence up on the hill where the railroad track was. And the teacher says, do not bring your sled tomorrow because it's thawing and you got a lot of mud. But being a little tyke like I was, mischievous, I took my sled anyway. And I went through the mud and across the street and under the barbed wire and got stuck there by the railroad track. Naturally, I had mud on my face, and naturally, the teacher did reprimand me. So that is where it all started, I guess. And so that school taught me how to speak English because I was speaking Czech all this time up to that time, and which is very interesting. And as I grew up, then we went to St. Ludmila's school. It was a Catholic school, and there were no school buses, naturally, so we would walk to school, which was about 3 miles, and it was very interesting. And I remember sometimes my brother Ray and I, after school, would go home, and it would be raining, just pouring down rain. And I remember we passed this house, and in the yard was a big apple tree. And I remember that because at one time I snuck up and took an apple, and that is, stealing. So then when it was really raining, I mean, we were soaked. I went up on the porch and knocked on the door. She looked out the window, but she wouldn't let us in. So I said, whoa. So we walked home. We didn't quite make it home because we stopped at Kohlhovi's, which were a cousin, and they were cousins to my dad. They had 3 little girls, and so we were just sopping wet. So Mrs. Kohlhovi took us in the porch room and had us take all of our clothes off and then get dry, and they put girl clothes on us. And that was so embarrassing that we had to go home with girl clothes on. And I still remember this, and I remember the Kohlhovi family. They're just been wonderful. But naturally, they have all passed. So my dad, off the farm now, is working in Cedar Rapids at the Queen's Furniture Company off of 16th Avenue. And he was designing and building furniture. One day his mallet slipped and he hit him in the groin, He then was in terrible pain, was taken to Mercy Hospital. They did operate on him. He was disabled, and so now he is unemployed. There's no insurance naturally in those days. So we eventually lost the house, the Model T, and everything, and we moved in with his parents, Grandma and Grandpa Drejos in Cedar Rapids. And I remember we were on the second floor, and the second floor was like a storage area with coats, fur coats all over. And I remember my brother Ray and I would run in between the coats and just have a good time. Well, I think that Grandma and Grandpa Drejos didn't have a lot of patience, so consequently we were asked to either move or do something. So then we moved to Aunt Annie's house, Aunt Annie and Uncle Ralph. And my dad stayed with his parents because he was very ill, and as time went on, the family was separated, and he stayed with his folks. And our adventure of one family to another, our relatives would take us in for a week or two, and then the next family would take us in for a week or two. And then eventually my mother, I think, got a part-time job where she rented a little house, and we went to St. Matthew's School. And I can remember coming home one afternoon, and it had a linoleum floor, which is slick, and we could run from one room to another like in a circle. And so my mother gave us some prunes, and so I was chewing on a prune with a prune seed in my mouth as we were running around. Well, I slipped and fell, hit a corner of a chair, busted my mouth open, bleeding all over the place. Ma got a towel, put it over that, put it in a red wagon. We went down the street several blocks, down a hill to Aunt Annie's house. And there we had to wait because Uncle Ralph didn't get off to work, and he had a car, and then they took us to Mercy Hospital where they operated on me, and I could see the nuns today because the nuns were in the surgical room. They ran Mercy Hospital. And she came with this mask to put over my face, and I was fighting furiously. And that's the last I remember. They stitched my mouth up, and maybe they should have stitched it a little bit more. But anyway, I remember telling Uncle Ralph, I said, at 5 years old, I have now 5 stitches in my mouth. And so that's how I reacted to that. Then, as time went on, we made arrangements to go to Minnesota to Uncle Joe and Aunt Mary's farm. And they had about 8 or 9 children, big farm, and Uncle Joe was a very firm German. And so my brother and I arrived there, and so we were like foreign city people, and they were farm people. And we lived there for about 2 years, and my cousin Marie taught me how to ride. Blackie was the horse, and they rode bareback. And so she taught me how to ride the horse so I could go out and get the cows, bring them in the evening so that we could milk them in the morning. And then we learned how to plant potatoes and grow all kinds of things. And I remember one Sunday where my cousin Nick and Joe did not go to church, so they took me up on a haystack and taught me how to smoke so that I would get very ill. So then the next trick they pulled on me, they said, at night is we're going to go snipe hunting. So they got a gunny sack, and we went out in the field. It was dark, and they said, now you hold this sack open